Hey guys, so this is gonna be a bit slower and fairly unscripted video. I was working on my next game review, and over the course of that, I needed to take a short break from playing games and switch briefly to something related, but still, another form of entertainment. And I remembered that there's this thing called Arcane, which is a video game adaptation, an adult animated show based on League of Legends, which I, by the way, never played. But still, I thought, why not give that a crack, see if it's any good? And I watched it, I liked it. Then I decided to take a look at what other people are saying about this. Is it really as good as I think it is, or is it better? Is it worse? And one of the things I noticed is that the whole video game adaptation curse argument is being brought up again in the context of Arcane. Now, as I just mentioned, I really liked the show, but this isn't really going to be a video focusing on Arcane, more on the video game adaptation curse itself, and is it real, is it not real, if it is, who broke it, etc. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is, well, the internet being what it is, it tends to have a fairly short memory. And I believe in, giving credit where credit is due. So yeah, while I think that Arcane deserves all the success it's getting, and all the praise, it really is an excellent adaptation. I felt the need to kind of, discuss the whole video game adaptation curse aspect of it and, try to figure out where are we on that front as fans of video games. I believe each of us probably wants at least one favorite game adapted in the form of a movie or a show and adapted well. So let's see where we are. So first off, what exactly is this whole curse of video game adaptations thing? It's this idea and even a stigma in some sense that stipulates that video games cannot be properly adapted into movies or shows, or in other words, that an adaptation of a video game is inherently going to be bad. That it just can't be good. And if you look back over the last 25, maybe even 30 years, there have been a fair share of attempts to turn video games into movies, and objectively speaking, most of them were pretty bad, which is why the whole thing became kind of a stigma and why there wasn't really even much interest in making an earnest attempt at doing a video game adaptation, until maybe recent 5 or 10 years, probably 5. Anyway, most of you have probably heard of most of those adaptations that I'm thinking about, starting with, fighting games like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat back in the 90s. I mean, objectively, those movies are pretty bad, but they somehow managed to pull something off. And you have to remember that at that time, none of those fighting games had any kind of lore. The characters were just, these cool looking fighters. They didn't have any particular backstory or anything like that. So even though those movies were really bad, objectively, you have to give them credit for managing to accomplish something, and create something out of very scarce source material. All they had at their disposal was, these cool looking characters, and they had to think up, what the plot would be, what the backstory of those characters would be, etc. And while I definitely don't think that those movies contributed to breaking the curse, uh, some praise should go their way for what they managed to accomplish at the time. Now, between then and now, we've had a bunch of other, questionable adaptations. The Resident Evil one, the two Hitman attempts, Max Payne, and who knows what else. But yeah, all of those were, mediocre at best. There were some things that they did well, some ideas that mostly made you wonder, wow, look at this. What if only they did the script better, if only they casted some of the characters more appropriately, what could have been. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be. However, in recent years, we did get several excellent video game adaptations in the form of adult animation. The first of them, Castlevania, which I don't think anyone should forget. That's the one that I believe truly showed us that you can make good video game adaptations in the form of a show or a movie. However, even with four excellent seasons of Castlevania, it's normal to be skeptical, to think to yourself, was this a fluke, or did we actually reach that point where we can get good stuff based on video games? And that's where Dota 2 and Arcane now, that's where they come in. That's what makes them important. And I'll get to that in a little bit, but before I get to that, I do want to take a step back, because I do believe there's one thing that, while it wasn't all it could have been, it ended up being pretty mediocre. I believe it was the first earnest attempt at making a good video game adaptation, and I believe it's the first thing that made a dent in that so-called video game adaptation curse. And what I'm talking about is the Warcraft movie from 2016. Yeah, it's a pretty troubled production, unfortunately. Tragedy struck at the worst possible time for the director, so he did what he could under the circumstance. But, even as troubled or mediocre as that movie ended up being, you can see just watching those scenes that it was really an earnest attempt at making a good video game adaptation. It honored the source material, it respected the characters, it did its best with the casting, especially for the orcish side. Those scenes with the orcish characters, they show you that there was a lot of attention put here, not just visually, but for making us care about those characters, even on that traditionally evil side from those early Warcraft games. It was, they were well written, they were well acted, and yeah, they were visually stunning. They looked great. They looked as they would in the game cinematics. The biggest problem of that movie is that, well, some of the casting on the human side was a bit problematic, and well, the editing process, it seems, was a bit rushed, because if you look at the individual scenes, they look good, but they're not well connected. Anyway, that's enough about Warcraft. My main point is, just to remind people that that was the first earnest attempt at a good video game adaptation, and I believe that that's what made the first dent in that so-called curse of video game adaptations. And then came Castlevania, which, as we've already established, is widely praised, loved by people who've played the games and people who didn't play the games. And we've had 4 seasons of that, but we did need a few others just to make sure that we really did reach that point where the curse is well and truly broken. And that's, like I said, where Arcane and Dota 2 Dragon's Blood come in. And the reason why they are extra important is not only that they were well received and that we're gonna have a second season of each of those. The reason, and I don't mean this as a slight against the source, inspiration or anything. I think this, elevates the adaptations further. The reason they're important is because the games they are based on don't actually have much of a story to offer. They've got these cool looking heroes. Each hero has a tiny bit of lore in the form of a text attached to them, just to make them a bit more interesting to the players. But these are not games with deep story modes. These are multiplayer games where people fight it out playing as these cool heroes, and that's it. So to be able to take characters from that universe, flesh them out, make them into likable, believable, interesting characters, and create a plot that's interesting to follow, that's a really, really important achievement. It's something that way back when that old Mortal Kombat movie did to a point, but not even that accomplishment was not even close to this one. The circumstances were similar, in terms of, how much could you actually pull from the source material, but the level of accomplishment is just, it's not really possible to compare. So yeah, that's basically the summary of, how we got here. And I suppose the final question that I wanted to pose is, what does this actually show us? Because, I mean, yeah, we did get several really good adaptations. We also unfortunately got a few bad ones as well. I mean, that Mortal Kombat movie, the new one that came out this year, that's unfortunately a really, really disappointing turn of events. We're also getting a new Resident Evil movie, which I'm not exactly sure how that's going to turn out, but it doesn't look promising. However, we are next to those, we're getting some really cool shows. So, what this all teaches us is that not only are good video game adaptations possible, they are a fact of reality and they are something that the audience wants and can enjoy regardless of whether or not they played the games these things are based on. It's only a matter of having the right people behind those projects, people who actually are interested in telling good stories in that universe and making earnest attempts at adapting what the video games already offer, for the big or the small screen. And I really hope we get more of those, whether it's in the format of adult animations like the three shows I mentioned, or in the format of finally a good video game movie. I don't really care, as long as it's good. So yeah, that's mostly what I had to say, what I wanted to share on this topic. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think I'm full of it? Do you think I'm, stating the obvious? Did I just waste your time, or do you think this was kind of interesting to hear? For me, it was something that I felt like talking about, and I'm curious to hear other people's thoughts. All in all, that's what I had to say for this one. So take care, and I'll see you in the next one.